Good evening! Good evening, everyone. We are live. Sorry for the slightly late start, but I had to feed a cat, and B was getting glammed up and showing me up because I feel very underdressed now.
I'm a bit overdressed, but I just felt like wearing my bows.
I would rather be
I
overdressed.
tried out. Right, they're a bit wonky. I forgot because last time we did it with us both, I forgot I don't see the comments, do I?
Oh no, I have to put them up on screen.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm trying to get on your level. Hang on. Good evening, Ryan. I hope you're feeling okay. I miss you. Hello, Sylvie.
Hello. How's everyone doing?
I'm good. Well, who cares?
Is anyone excited for Love Island tonight?
Oh, B.
Yeah, is what's his name? Liam gonna stay with Millie or not?
Probably not. I'm not gonna lie.
I don't know if anyone else watches it, but
I love this comment, but it's potentially the wrong energy for today because this book is not complimentary of the last lesbians. Oh
no!
It's fluey season. Oh, Rowan. That's not happening. Right, I was going to say we should wait, but I guess we're late, so if people were going to come, they're probably already here, so we can just get started.
Yeah. You're going to get up the fancy presentation.
Good thing! Amazing. I'm so glad, Rowan. You need to rest. It is time. Finally, it is time.
Yeah.
Karen, why are you reading the Daily Mail, though?
Probably not many do Love Island sections. I don't know.
Do you think, is it too late for me to hop in now? Have I missed too much drama?
I mean, like, the drama that will happen tonight might not feel as, you know, impactful, but it was still, I think it is going to be a heavy episode.
Oh, thank you, Gareth. I hope your sprints are going well currently. I had to leave to do this. I'm sorry. But I hope you enjoy the book when you finish it. I would love to know what you think when you get around to the ending, because we will be talking about the ending in this discussion. So don't watch it back until you finish. I can get on board with the bloodbath. Yeah, I would be annoyed. That's your whole life, is these people for weeks on end, and then they betray you. Yeah, I mean, I'm honestly surprised that there hasn't been a murder on Love Island. I swear to God, it's like putting unhinged people in an isolated location where all they have is themselves and no social media.
I think there has been people who've been taken out for being violent.
That does make sense.
Yeah,
isn't that literally? It's like a concept as old as Agatha Christie, gathering people to a secluded place and giving them no method of communication with the outside world. Very on topic for the book that we're discussing today as well.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Don't care if you're a murderer as long as you're not a Tory. All right, should we get this little presentation up?
Yeah.
Add to stream. So, if you've wandered into the wrong place and don't know what we're doing, we're discussing the July book for our Briar Rose Book Club, which is The Water Cure by Sophie Mackintosh, which was longlisted for the Man Booker Prize in 2018. I don't follow Man Booker as much as Kieran does, but
Yeah.
it didn't win, so I don't know what that means. I don't know if it should have won. I don't know who did win that year. But it was longlisted because it's written beautifully, and we'll get into that as we begin the discussion. So, we should begin the discussion. So, we have our first question on the screen, but I am going to begin with a little extract and just synopsis to kind of set the scene, tell you what the book is about. So for me personally, and I think for B as well, the writing style was the strongest element of this book. And to get a sense for those who maybe haven't read it or maybe need a push to read it, I'm going to just read like the opening section of the book and then give a brief synopsis, and then we'll get into like the meat. So it begins with Grace, Leah, and Sky's perspective, and this is how it opens. Once we had a father, but our father dies without us noticing. It's wrong to say that we don't notice. We are just absorbed in ourselves that afternoon when he dies. Unseasonable heat. We squabble as usual. Mother comes out on the terrace and puts a stop to it by raising her hand, a swift motion against the sky. Then we spend some time lying down with lengths of muslin over our faces, trying not to scream. And so he dies with none of us women bearing witness, none of us accompanying him. It is possible we drove him away, that the energy escaped our bodies despite our attempts to stifle it and became a smog clinging around the house. My screen just went completely black, and I was like,
No, mine did that happen to you as well?
yeah.
Oh no.
I'm just checking if we're still streaming. Hello? What has
It
happened?
says live.
Yes, I think we're back. I think we're okay.
Yeah. You shut off around the house.
Around the house.
Yeah. For me anyway. I don't know.
Oh my goodness. That's so stressful. That's never happened to me on a stream before. Okay. Should I keep going? Or should I wait? I don't know. Where are people? Where did you go? Oh, that's embarrassing. Should I wait? I'm just gonna carry on. It's fine. Okay. We were gone, but we're back. It's fine. Okay. Around that. Okay. Um, okay, I'll start at the beginning. That's why I just don't know how to proceed. I'm quite flustered. That was quite stressful. Okay. The interrogation begins at dinner when he fails to turn up. Mother pushes the food and plates from the table in her agitation, one sweep of the arm, and we search the endless rooms of the house. He is not in the kitchen, soaking fish in a tub of brine, or pulling up withered potatoes outside, inspecting the soil. He is not out on the terrace at the top of the house, surveying the still surface of the pool 3 floors below, and he is certainly not in the pool itself. The second of his splashing is always violent enough to carry. He is not in the lounge nor the ballroom, the piano untouched, the velvet curtains heavy with undisturbed dust. Moving up the staircase again, a spine through the center of the house, we check our rooms individually, our bathroom, though we know he will not be there. From the scattered formation, we come together to search the garden, search deeper, sticking long branches into the pond's green murk. Eventually, we are out on the beach and we realize one of the boats has gone to a furrow in the sand where it has been pushed out. For a moment, we think he has gone for supplies, but then we remember he was not wearing the protective white suit. We did not do the leaving ceremony, and we looked towards the rounded glow of the horizon, the air peach ripe with toxicity. And Mother falls to her knees. Our father had a big and difficult body. When he sat down, his swimming shorts rode up and exposed the whiteness of his thigh where it usually covered. If you killed him, it would be like pushing over a sack of meat. It would require someone much stronger than us. The father shape he leaves behind quickly becomes a hollow that we can put our grief into, which is an improvement in a way. So that is the opening of.
It's a very gripping introduction, isn't it, to this?
Yeah. I think so. And I think, obviously, the book is split into 3 sections. So the first section is called Father, the second section is called Men, or the Men, and the last section is called Sisters. It's Father, Men, then Sisters. So I think opening with that, the death of the father, and that sort of being the incident which kicks off the rest of the novel is really significant, and you find out the role of the father much more as the book goes on. So a brief synopsis for those who maybe haven't read the book or need a reason to read the book potentially. We are following these 3 sisters, Grace, Leah, and Skye, who live on an island with their parents, Mother, and King. And King is their father, who has died at the beginning of the novel. And they have been raised to believe that the world outside of their little island is toxic, and that the toxicity that exists within men. And so they have been taught to be wary of men and protect themselves from the outside world by doing various treatments and rituals that are often painful and sort of violent, in order to sort of protect themselves and purge any impurities that they may come into contact with that aren't on their island. So the novel is quite lonely. It's just these 3 sisters and their 2 parents on this island, and then obviously the father dies at the beginning, and we sort of follow their story. And then later on in the second section, named Men, some men wash up on the shore of the island, and this obviously disturbs the routine that they have going on there. So the first question of tonight's discussion is: the water cure is defined as feminist dystopia. Does it merit constant comparison to Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale? And potentially I shouldn't have written it in this way because I haven't read The Handmaid's Tale. But The Handmaid's Tale, obviously, for lots of female writers, heralded this, new genre of feminism meets dystopian, and it started the trend of these novels, which has sort of picked up pace in the last few years with books like Red Clocks or Before She Sleeps or Vox, The Power, all of these books that sort of imagine a feminist dystopia in which women are being persecuted over, birthing rights or lack of birthing rights or, anything like that. So this fits snugly in that sort of pantheon of novels. And it is a little bit annoying that I guess every single book written by a woman about some sort of female-led dystopia gets compared to Atwood. I mean, on the one hand, it makes sense because she sort of coined and heralded in that genre. But I think thematically and stylistically, it's quite different to the one book I've read of Margaret Atwood's. But I just thought it was interesting to look at this sort of trend of female-written, female-led dystopian narratives. And in an interview with Vulture, I believe it was, the author, I can't remember her first name, but she wrote Red Clocks, and she acknowledged that she considers her work as paratopian, because dystopia feels too separate, and it's actually not an imagined future hundreds and hundreds of years from now. It's actually happening maybe next week. And then she said this other thing. Sorry, the writer of this article on Vulture said, The scariest thing about Shirley Jackson's short story, The Lottery, is not the horrifying ritual of human sacrifice, but the community's complete acceptance of it. This current style of dystopia rightly brings that human agency to the fore. In doing so, these novels more accurately portray individuals as controlling institutions rather than the other way around. They also show how individuals often use these institutions for ill, to exploit. And this, I think, if you've read the book, you'll see how this
Definitely.
does tie in to the water cure. It's not critiquing so much like the government in the way that so many novels of this ilk do, the way that it's like the system is broken, because obviously yes, but this is more about the individuals within that system and the violence we enact on each other on like a human level. Yeah.
And how
Jump in.
I guess how, like we were discussing before this live show, how in their kind of protection of the three girls, they just leave them more vulnerable and fragile. And that's kind of their aim, because they want to keep them kind of ripe for manipulation. And they want to keep them as girls, basically, not to grow into women.
I agree with that.
Yeah, that is true.
And I think that was one thing that I did feel a bit lacking. I mean, I've got it in my notes as well, that the one thing I wanted more actually of was the women. So there's this element of the novel that we don't see very much, where women come to the island and it's clearly women that have been wronged or have faced some sort of violence or some sort of harrowing event. So they come to the island bedraggled and weak, and they stay almost like, if they've come to a hotel for a spa treatment, and they have this thing performed on them called the water cure, which obviously is the title of the book, and it is basically this sort of purifying ritual for these women, and then they come and go, and there's this section of the book where they talk about the welcome book. So these women who come and stay and have these treatments done, to sort of purge the men and the toxicity from their systems, they write their experiences in this welcome book, and the way that's presented throughout the novel is very short snippets in between the chapters of the sisters. So it's not a main element of it, but it's just something that's going on in the background. You have this awareness of women coming and going from the island, but you don't really get any named characters.
I find it quite interesting how they were able to like come and go.
And how that doesn't make the sisters question like why they can't come and go as well. But
it does stop, doesn't it? It does stop after the
father dies.
falls. Doesn't it stop after like a woman falls from commits suicide?
Yes.
And also another one dies during the water cure, which is basically they're forced to kind of partially drown in a kind of bowl of salted water, and one person actually does drown, and it's kind of they're kind of said to be they weren't ready for the treatment, and that's why they died.
I think what I wrote in my notes was salty baptism. So that sort of, I don't think salty baptism would be as good of a title as the water cure. Maybe I'll write a feminist dystopia called Salty Baptism. We'll see. But I did highlight a few of these sort of extracts from this welcome book, and they are just little snippets that appear in between chapters, and you don't get a name under them. You don't know who wrote them, or you just get these sort of very, very brief little interludes on this page interludes of these different women's experiences, and some of them are quite harrowing and some of them are a little bit more mundane, but it's basically their sort of reasons for coming to the island and getting their treatments. And so I was going to just read three of them and then discuss sort of what that reminded me of. So one of them on page 141, if you want to follow along at home, is stupid to meet a stranger, but I was still convinced by the intrinsic goodness of people. I was so innocent, and I had not been exposed to the world very much. I didn't understand how rapidly things had changed, how all that had been needed was permission for everything to go to shit, and that permission had been granted. I didn't know that there was no longer any need for the men to hold their bodies in check or to carry on the lie that we mattered. And then the next one is on page 155, and this one is, it was no one big thing, but many small things. Each one chipped away at me. By the end, I felt skinless. My cuticles bled. I was aged immeasurably. I felt terrible that I had so little in reserve, that the other women could cope. I felt like I had failed them. And then the last one, potentially the most sort of powerful one, because this is the one that ends the end of the second section of the book, I believe. Yes, and this is, everybody knew and nobody helped. It was a secret that we were all choking on. Even my mother, my sisters, my aunts, they passed it around. They said with their eyes, why should you escape it? What makes you better than us? Can't you see our hearts have been bleeding for years? And I guess what that reminded me of when I was doing research for this discussion was that every single article that I came across that was chronicling the boom of feminist dystopia or dystopia realism, because obviously we know with The Handmaid's Tale, Margaret Atwood famously said that everything that was in The Handmaid's Tale is something that has really happened in the world somewhere, because she didn't want people to accuse her of thinking up these horrific, horrible things to happen to women. Everything that happens in that book has genuinely happened somewhere in the world. So there has been this boom of looking at gender roles, critiquing current society, this sort of paratopian instead of dystopian. And I couldn't help but thinking of the Me Too movement, because that's obviously what's also mentioned in a lot of these articles. They're sort of crediting the Me Too movement in these authors' interest in gender and gender roles and how we still sort of communicate with feminism, because obviously, if you live in the Western world, you can sometimes feel like, oh, I have rights. Cool. And it's just basically about not getting complacent, and these little snippets from this welcome book, these little snapshots into the experience of women, really reminded me of that Me Too era when you just saw so many tweets, because obviously that was a hashtag started on Twitter, of women who had experienced violence to varying degrees of sort of seriousness. And it was like so eerie, because it wasn't that these women didn't have a voice. Obviously they did have a voice and they were voicing their experiences, but they still felt lost in this crowd of just like a cacophony of experiences, and none of them like fully stood out because there were just so many and it was so overwhelming. And I think that's a really interesting element of this book as well, because obviously I said that I liked that and I kind of wanted more of it. I wanted to see more of those women coming and going from the island. But the fact that they do play a minimal role, it does sort of make sense to me, because this is violence that is just happening in the background, in everyday society. It's stuff that we just sort of have learned to live with and not have it at the forefront all the time. And that's what was so scary about Me Too, was that all these experiences were coming out that then just kind of immediately got forgotten because there was just so much of it, and we only really focused on like Harvey Weinsteins or like the famous people who were involved in that scandal. Mainly the men actually was what the focus was, annoyingly. So that was one element that I really liked. But I do agree with Sylvie's point that it doesn't really feel like a fully sort of realized world. And I think
they're unreliable narrators, and everything they've been told, it's all kind of filtered through, either king or their mother or the men that come. So it's, it could be present day for all we know.
And there were some references that made me question when it was set, because some of the food that they eat seems sort of modern-ish, and like some things that they meant, like they mentioned having radio and stuff like that. So it's not like proper, detached lifestyle, you know.
Yeah, and I think that there's a bit when they have magazines come through, and one of them, I think it might have been Leah, reads, you know, quickly reads like the first page or two before it's snatched away from her, and then they're kind of banned. And so I guess like the outside world is kind of just blocked from them, but there are kind of snippets of times where it's kind of been allowed to come through by accident. Yeah, but I found it interesting, this bit which is Leah talking about the where she describes the welcome book, which is, you know, what these little quotes from these women is about, you know, is collected. And she says the welcome book is largely too abstract to scare me much. And yeah, and through that, though I am certainly sad for the women and their pain, dimly aware somewhere that in this pain is the tradition to which I belong. And it is strange hearing, I guess, of this kind of violence as particularly as a young girl, or a girl who's kind of, I guess, sheltered, as in this book. But it's, yeah.
So my dad just came in to give me dinner, spaghetti, which is honestly the worst thing you could have on a live stream, but we're gonna make it work.
Yum yum yum. Yeah, I found that quite interesting, because it's kind of, in a way, she's kind of distancing herself from the like experiences, because she's like, you know, it's so unknown that she can't really comprehend it, but also she's also saying, oh, it doesn't scare me, kind of thing. I don't know. I just found it interesting. Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally get that. I found, I mean, it's something I guess that we'll come back to later, but a bit like the last book, I enjoyed the kind of journey, but I found the ending a bit disappointing. And you said that it said somewhere, maybe even on the book or something, that it was one of the best endings someone had read in, like, one of the quotes on the book.
Yeah, wait, where is it?
But
on the back
was a bit
it says, yeah, visceral, hypnotic, one of my favorite endings I've read in a long while. I was like, really? But we'll get to that. We will get to that.
Yeah. I found also, like, I was saying to Anna, like, all these kind of you know, comparisons to The Handmaid's Tale, and I was saying how, like, it's very like The Beguiled to me, because, you know, in that it's set at a girls' school during the Civil War, and it's a kind of matriarchy almost, with just the head teacher, who's kind of in control, and then girls of all different ages, a bit like how, you know, Grace, Leah and Sky are, and then a soldier comes into the house and he's injured at first, a bit like, you know, the men in this are kind of more vulnerable because they come onto the shore and they're kind of still in recovery after a shipwreck, and then, so, you know, all the girls kind of get, you know, fascinated by him, and the book's told from the different girls' points of view. Yeah, so it seemed, and the kind of ending is quite similar too, so it just seemed there was a lot of things. But I guess, like, I think the book's written by a man, and I guess maybe they wanted like a female feminist writer to compare it to.
Yeah, everyone wants to be compared to Margaret Atwood, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, should we move on to our next question of the evening? Which is, sisterhood is a huge part of the novel. How does it drive or hinder Leah, Grace, and Skye, which are the three sisters in the novel? Do you want to kick off?
Yeah, I mean, one of the first quotes that you picked out actually was just after I think it's just after the father has died, and they say you know, they're kind of in mourning, and they say we hold hands very tightly so we can blur where the I ends and the sister begins. And there's just, especially near the beginning, they're kind of seen as kind of one, you know, whole, like it, you know, that's being sisters is their kind of full identity. And I was also going to read another little bit, which kind of brings, I thought this kind of opening to this chapter, which is in Leah's perspective, it's on page 11 to page 12, kind of introduces like a lot of the different characters quite well. So 1 month after we lose our father, King, I am standing at the edge of the swimming pool in the lavender light that comes up where the border hits the sky. Our pool is the sea made safe, salt water filtered through unseen pipes and, I don't know how to say this word actually, sluices. Blue and white tiles surrounding it, and a marble counter where drinks were once served. Oh yeah, interesting that it used to be a hotel where they lived. Thick rivets of salt are laid down on the tiles immediately bordering the water, guarding against toxins brought in on the wind. King explained to us that the salt drew out badness like damp. His hands quick and busy as he scattered it, tanned a deep, dry brown. I am wearing a white cotton dress, fishing weights sewn into the hem, the sleeves, the neckline, where their coldness presses against my collarbone. I have not worn it since King died. On the pastel striped recliner behind me, my belongings, towel and water, sunglasses, and an enamel cup of cold coffee. Taking a deep breath, I release myself into the water. Grace and I are the only ones who play the drowning game. Skye is more than old enough now, but Mother kicked up a fuss when King suggested that she start. The baby, the favourite. And Mother herself has always been exempt. She has suffered enough already. There is little we can do to save her body now, but beyond the palliative. I don't know if I said that right. But when we were younger, she made a point of watching us from one of the recliners, a tall glass of water in her hand, her favourite blue linen dress hitched up to mid-thigh. Grace and I could go together when we first started. King held us both under the water with ease. He only invented the drowning dress later, when we became bigger, our limbs harder to manipulate. My sister was small for her age, and when I was 12 and she 14, we overlapped, a year of being exactly the same size before I overtook her. I remember this as the golden year, the year of my double. We wore identical swimming costumes that Mother had sewn by hand, red with a bow at the left shoulder. Our lungs started to develop the capacity of grown women so that we could hold a note for a long, long time, we could blow our emergency whistles for what felt like whole minutes. But I just thought that was like a good bit to read out to kind of introduce, Sky's a lot younger than the other girls, and she's kind of both. It's interesting that she's both I guess babied by everyone, and also it's important to know that she's kind of lived, in this, she's kind of more available to manipulate, I guess, because she's been there. I guess that Leah's been there her whole life at this place virtually, but she seems kind of at different points, both Grace and Leah seem to like I guess see holes in this kind of world that Mother and King has created for the girls, but Sky seems to not. I mean, that comes up later when
and they read actually a lot younger than they are, because when I started the book, I thought that Grace and Leah were sort of older teenagers, so like 17, 18, 19, and Sky was like a child. But then you sort of find out towards the end of the novel, and I was like quite taken aback that Grace is actually 30. Which makes Leah 28, which is way older than I thought, and I wondered if that was an intentional choice there to sort of reveal that at the end. But
I think it is because I think the whole point of in this kind of cultish environment that they've been forced to remain girls, to not to remain pure, innocent, asexual, even though they're not, and it's and I think that's the whole kind of the idea of the idea, you don't know if this was they originally came here, King and Mother, with good intentions or not, but if they did, it became kind of perverted in a way. It's
I think it's interesting that we never do get Sky's POV, because we get POV.
We get her with the other two, but not.
So there are sections of the novel where it's Grace, Leah, Sky, and it's all of them, and it's told in like a wee voice, and then we get just Grace and just Leah, but we never get just Sky, and I think that's a really interesting choice, as well. Sort of stripping away Sky's agency, because she is the youngest, but also, like you say, she's sort of the most ingrained in that environment, and she seems like a lot more juvenile than the other two.
Yeah, definitely. I think I worked out that she must be around 16 to 18. I think I figured out. Just for, they mention kind of gaps between each of their ages throughout the book, and I kind of tried to note down them a bit. But I guess one.
And I think at some point it's mentioned as well that Grace and Leah don't have the same father.
Yeah, so I think it's just Grace, but I could be wrong.
Because it talks about, I mean, slight spoilers, but this is a discussion. But when Grace falls pregnant, and you find out that it's by her father, King, and that's obviously traumatic. But then towards the end of the novel, when you sort of see flashbacks of her with King, he talks about how it's okay because he's not her father. And she talks about sort of the heartbreak of that, of discovering that she's not linked with her sisters by blood,
and being like, because King's kind of shown as a kind of safe man who, and I guess she thinks, who is this father, is you know, like, because obviously they're taught that all men are, you know, apart from King, are, you know, to be feared. So then her father is to be feared, and then where does that leave her, you know? I mean, one thing I thought is that maybe she could have potentially been the product of rape. It could have been a
Yeah,
non-known.
because it was like you read out the illusions that the mother has suffered.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
all kind of left unknown. But yeah.
Interesting. So, shall we move on?
Yeah.
So, our next question is how does the male and female gaze manifest over the course of the novel?
Yeah.
So, I have a quote which is back on the slideshow, so I'm gonna have to go back. Again from that Vulture article by Cody Delastrati, which was about this new wave of feminist dystopian, and she's writing specifically about the water cure in this section. And it says, as in many other sheltered young people stories, the girls are told that the outside world, particularly the male part of it, is toxic. But the novel is able to escape its genre's usual snares because it deals with gender in a way that's fundamentally true. While Mackintosh notes the literal toxicity of men and their desire for control, she also shows how much an unexamined blanket fear of a gender can be wielded as a tool of oppression in and of itself. The girls are led to believe that all men are incredibly violent, which paradoxically keeps them under the control of King, who enacts his own form of psychological violence in the name of protection. When the girls finally do encounter a group of men, there is not the immediate awful violence they've been groomed to expect, but something more realistic. This is a novel at once of its time and for all time, a fable that underscores not just how humans act now, but how they have always acted, with general selfishness and a desire for control. And I'll leave that on the screen before I go back to the question. But I found this really interesting. That obviously, you know, when you first learn about feminism and you first have that awakening, you're like, oh, for God, this is shit. You know, like, fuck men. You know, this is sucks. And obviously, it's a lot more nuanced than that, right? And I think a lot of the time, books like these, like The Handmaid's Tale, like this, can be panned by critics by being like, oh, well, not all men, you know, that bollocks that we've sort of gotten used to. But this is a lot more nuanced, and it's saying that actually, yeah, you know, going too far the other way, and you know, it's manipulative, and it allows those parents to have power over these girls. And I thought it was interesting as well that, you know, it's not only King, their father, that wields this toxic power over them; it's their mother as well. And I think a lot of these novels don't like to go into that territory where like women themselves can actually uphold these structures of abuse and fear,
And also how
and enjoy
she,
it in a weird way as well. You know,
yeah,
like I'm sure, you know, she gets some weird sort of satisfaction over the control of her daughters.
yeah, and she knew about, you know, King and Grace,
Mm.
and you know, didn't do anything, and actually, as well as not doing anything to, you know, protect her daughter, she also, you know, started treating her more as a kind of oh, what's the word, like, you know, against, acted, you know, kind of cruel to her, and as if she was, you know, fighting for King almost between
Yeah.
the two. I can't think of the word, like, yeah, if it comes to me I'll say it, but yeah, so yeah, it's strange, isn't it?
And just going off that last point in that in that quote from the article.
Competitor.
There you go. Just going off of that last quote from the article, talking about the selfishness and control that does manifest itself in Leah's sort of romantic relationship that she has with Lou. I don't think it's pronounced like that, but that's how.
I think it's like low.
It's double Lew. Low, yeah, I'll say Low. That sounds more accurate than Lou. So he obviously washes up on the island with his son, and Leah quickly sort of gets a little bit infatuated with him. New person on the island, makes sense. And they do begin a sexual relationship, and it's quite one-sided. And so obviously, as sort of evidence in this quote, they don't immediately suffer violence from the men. And in a way, as we've said, they begin in a stronger position because the men arrive weak and unable to sort of do things for themselves, and the girls, nurse them back to health, and then the power starts to shift when the men are sort of at their full strength again.
You're right.
Sorry, there's just a loud barking outside my window.
But, I find it interesting is that we're also kind of introduced to boys and men at different ages, because we have Gwyll, who's Lo's son, and is a child, and he's described when they first meet the men, they say the boy is sweet, his eyes are pink rabbit like, and and also there's quotes later on about kind of them kind of looking at his innocence and kind of seeing, is there anything of him there already, that shows his potential to be a man and to be this cruel person that they think, all men are.
Yeah, and I think that's what we talked about when we mentioned the female gaze, because there's that bit, I think I've got it down on page 192, where, this is one of the girls' perspectives, I think it's Leah, and she says, I wonder, looking at his small and defeated face, whether he lives with the daily knowledge of the harm he could grow up to do, whether it is there like a piece of paper folded up around a secret word that he cannot yet understand. I wonder if Lo has caused damage to him before, and if so, whether Gwyll has borne witness to it, learned from it already. So that sort of potentiality for violence, and it's these girls, looking at this young boy as a potential man, a potential threat, even though they could probably overpower this child quite easily. And later on, they begin questioning Gil about his mother, and Gwyll is not wanting to talk about it. And Leah's narration says, we gather around him, we put our hands on him and try and comfort him. His shoulders, his arms, we push him back a little. He is surely too small to do us real harm. We are suddenly giddy with this realization. We are not monsters. We are not trying to pull him apart. We are just women who want to understand. And I find that interesting that they go to the child to try and understand the man, because it's like a less threatening version, it's a safe version of getting close to men in a way.
Yeah, but also I feel like another thing that cracks this kind of bubble is when Grace has her stillborn child, and it's a baby boy, and both, Grace kind of guesses, or just and Leah sees that it is a boy, but Skye doesn't, and it's I think that's a kind of point of change as well, because they kind of see this kind of innocent, very vulnerable child, and it's it's kind of not, same with Will, it's not what they imagine the men that they're taught to fear are supposed to be like, and it's kind of you know, I guess it's like a tragedy that kind of must, you know, poke holes in this kind of story their parents have told them. And also the fact that Grace gave birth to them. It's like they love their sister, so how can she make something that's evil, you know? Yeah, and
and there was that bit where we talked about how Lowe's with Leah and how like the sort of small ways violence comes into their relationship. And I think it's on page 184 where Lou is saying, "What's wrong with you?" Lou asks me, rubbing at his arm. "Nothing," I say, "but stay with me, stay." I get up, lunge for him again, but he just steps back further. "Can you not?" In front of the boy, Lou demands. "Can you please be normal for a second?" I do not know why I do not know why loving like everyone else is so unnatural to me. Lou holds up his hands, beckons for Gwyll to shelter behind him, as if I am dangerous, as if I am repulsive. Maybe I am. He must know, I think, as if in a trance. He must be able to tell what's going on, even at his age. He's still a man. This is still all his to come, his heritage, his right. "This is all getting a bit much, isn't it?" says Lou, attempting to be kinder, to diffuse the situation. "What has gotten into you?" A small pause. I understand that he is trying to shame me for my need. But unfortunately for him and for me, I'm totally shameless in this regard. I will demonstrate my need over and over for anyone who asks. I would take my strange and incapable heart out of my chest if I could, display it, absolve myself of responsibility. When I slap him hard in the face, his reaction is surprise. "You just hit me," he says, feeling out the damage, which is minimal. "Didn't think you had it in you." Gwyll drops the racket. He runs to the other end of the court, leaps for someone to come and help, but nobody is around. I try to lash out at Lowe again, but he grasps my wrists, holds them tight to immobilize me. "Right," he says. "I've had just about enough of all this." He shakes me. "Pull yourself together." The mark my body has left on his is fading already. My whole strength has barely any effect. My anger cannot touch him, cannot even be taken seriously. He is moving away from me all the time. "We had a good thing going on, I know, but I don't fucking belong to you," he tells me, and I give up the struggle. And I stand there before him, cowed, staring at him with stinging eyes. He still holds both of my wrists painfully, my palms grazed. I cannot move, and I do not want to. I don't think I've done anything to give you that impression. It occurs to me that I've never heard him say the word love out loud. This could be the moment when he will say it. He releases his grip on me, and his hand comes towards my face. I feel his knuckles stroke my cheek gently. The moment passes. And so I think obviously Leah doesn't know how to navigate this relationship with Lo. And I think because she's been trained to believe that all men are to be avoided, all men are to be toxic and violent, and then she finds this man who on first meeting isn't that way. She sort of thinks that he's so special and he's the only allow one to be perpetrated.
Hello? Have you come back?
Hello?
Hello.
I'm back. Hello?
But yeah, no.
I don't know what is wrong with the internet. I think it's all like the wind we're having. It's like very windy in my garden.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah. Yeah, no, I know what you mean, is that he's kind of regarded as special because he's not as bad as she thought it would be. Low expectations.
Exactly.
But one thing related to the kind of the female gaze that I wanted to talk about is the kind of times where they're kind of like looking at the men and kind of are curious, and I think they're really kind of beautifully written in how they're kind of, you know, it's from Leah's perspective, but she's kind of repulsed by them, but also enticed at the same time. So I was just going to read some quotes. So their mother is like making the men strip to check for weapons or anything that could hurt the women. And they're watching from inside the house through a window. We strain our eyes to look. There the men are, pulling off their t-shirts and jeans. Mother gestures. She is holding King's pistol up to them. They take their underwear off. Their skin is striped with different colours, like ours, but that is the only thing we seem to share. I am grimly fascinated. Grace makes a small sound of disgust. And, you know, and then later on, they're having dinner all together, and it's a scene that really reminds you of both a scene in the Virgin Suicides at the kind of dinner table scene in the movie, Sophia Coppola movie, and also later on in The Beguiled as well, where they're kind of watching the men at the table. The men eat quickly, too quickly. I worry they will choke. Lowe shucks oysters and slides them onto his plate and onto grills. There's something about the smoothness of his movements, his eyes luminous and quick. His arms have a fur on them that disgusts and enchants me at the same time. Grace kicks me under the table sideways when she sees me looking. Lowe teaches us to pronounce his name, but none of us can do it. So I resolve to practice it secretly so I can impress him. Drops of condensation roll down the wine glass that holds my water. James asks me how old I am, and I shrug. When he turns his attention to Grace and asks how far along she is, Mother takes the opportunity to preach about the superiority of daughters. We shuffle in our chairs. Do you have daughters? She asks the men. No, not yet, they tell her. Maybe one day. She is disappointed. Grace murderously dismembers the tail end of the fish. So it's yeah, it's kind of I think it's also interesting that the different reactions. Obviously, we know that Grace has had some sexual relationship with King, and you know that wasn't something that she wanted, and I feel like it kind of explains her kind of, you know, she never likes the men and is always kind of repulsed, you know, just purely repulsed. Whereas Leah's kind of, I guess, more innocent at this point, and she's kind of knows that, I guess it's a kind of forbidden fruit in a way. But it's, yeah.
Interesting. Are we ready for the next question? Okay. The girls spend their lives surrounded by water. How does this affect them? And honestly, I could have worded that question a million different ways because water crops up at so many points in this novel, as you would probably guess, it being called the water cure. But initially I've written down, I've just talked about the duality of water, because it's obviously associated with the water cure, which is a purifying ritual. It's seen as clean, it's seen as purging, it's seen as something necessary for survival. So it is this sort of mystical sort of healing cure. Water, you know, it can wash away your sins. I mean, we've seen that in Christianity, in the Bible, water baptism, we know all of that. Um, but then on the other hand, the girls, well, their parents make them play these drowning games where they have to get into the pool with weighted dresses and sort of build up their resistance, and all of these sort of cruel games where the water is associated with pain and fear and
And also
violence.
that they're not allowed in the sea, are they? They have to stick to the swimming pool because that's purified water, and then this other
Mhm.
kind is not contaminated.
Yeah. And then obviously they are told that they are on an island and they believe to be on an island. You find out towards the end of the novel that that's actually not the case, that they're part of the mainland that's just by the sea. I don't know how you spend your whole life there and not realize that, but
Well,
that's
they're surrounded by on one side they're
mm,
surrounded by the sea, and then
mm,
the other side they're surrounded by this really large forest, which I think is, that they kind of say it's why I guess King, to get their supplies he has to go off into the sea, and I think and go to another kind of bit of mainland is because the forest is very hard to get through,
yeah. Um,
or is just
and so
huge.
obviously, like, the water is this, like, they believe they're on an island, and they think it's this sort of protective barrier, I guess, between them and the toxic mainland where all the men are. It's sort of like this threshold that protects them, but also isolates
Like
them, and it,
suffocating, yeah.
yeah, and like yeah, it's stuff. So water does play this sort of dual role in the novel, where it is associated with sort of safety and protection and cleanliness and also fear and isolation and violence too. Um, and I guess like this is like a bit of a bit of a tangent, but there's a lot of writing about water that ruminates on, mortality and like it's just I think it's not when you set a novel by the sea, it's not like an accident because I think there's something about being by the sea, hearing the waves coming in and out. It sounds like breathing. You always feel like you're in a more pensive state. It is this sort of, we've talked about liminal spaces so many times on these book clubs. It does exist in like a liminal space, I think. And also just, talking about mothers and daughters, the simple act of like listening to waves can remind you of being in the womb, and it's very meditative. And so I think the fact that they are surrounded by water and they're in like a abusive, suffocating relationship with their mother, it's not a coincidence. So yeah. Those are my
It
notes.
is really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Is it bad that it sort of makes me wanna go swimming again? Even though it's a very negative thing in this book, but, um, I like swimming.
I mean, it's nice if just don't go in a drowning dress.
Um, oh, yeah, and I've also written down a little, note about this one moment between Leah and Grace towards the end of the well, not towards the end, it's page 176, where it's the only time that Grace sort of mentions having a child, having her stillborn child. And Grace is in the bath. And again, I just think it's important at this sort of key scene where is this big emotional moment between the two sisters. It's quite rare within the context of the rest of the novel. I think it's quite significant that she is in the bath and potentially more relaxed, or I don't know, more open to her sister. I don't know. I just think that's an interesting place to set this conversation that they have. While Grace is in the bath, almost as if like it's thawing her or something, because she's usually quite short and cold with her sisters. Um, but it's page 176, 177 really. Um, Yeah, and so Leah's sort of protesting because Grace has told her off a little bit about talking to Lo, the man. So yeah. We're not doing anything wrong, I tell her. You've betrayed us, she says simply. It's not true, I say. I know that it is. Leah, she says, he's dangerous. She buries her head unexpectedly into her wet hands for a second, but does not cry. Don't think you're the only one suffering, Grace says, raising her face back to mine. She is so beautiful. Whatever she is feeling is not written upon her the way it is upon me. And I think for a second about the first time my father placed a sharp object in my hand, how using it made a deep and terrible sense. Because my blood was even redder than my sister's blood. It ran thicker. My feet were as physical, as measurable as the pulse at my neck. I've decided to forgive you, though, she says after a long pause. I know you need help. I cry at that. I do. I do. First things first, she says. Protect your body from now on. How, I ask, salt water running into my mouth. She tells me I can add vinegar to my bath, bicarbonate of soda. I should salt the water at the very least, have it as hot as possible, hotter than is pleasant. No more babies, she says. They never came from the sea, of course. I stare at her. I realize what Lo was telling me earlier. I realize finally what she really means. Do not ask me about that, she says, reading my thoughts. Not ever. So I don't. My hair, I ask instead, falling out where I pull at it, and my ears, and my ears, and my eyes, and my heart. Just don't look too closely, she says. Try to have less direct eye contact. Touch him through clothes if you must. I am stricken. If you can't, you can't, she says, resigned. You're the one who will suffer most. Truce. Shifting in the water, Grace seems to take me in as if for the first time, as if I had just walked in. She stares at my legs, and I pull the skirt of my dress down. I often think that Mother and King were very cruel to you. She touches my hand with her own. I wish things could have been different. Perhaps it's not too late. I ask if we can go to Mother's room, the three of us, and she appraises me from the water, drawing her knees up to her chest. All right, she says, reaching a hand out to me. Help me up. The skin of her fingertips is pruned and furrowed against my own. I hold out the towel for her to step into, notice the fragile ridge of her hip bones under the still swollen stomach. We are weakening. Which
it kind of, it also leads back into like, you know, all this kind of idea of contamination and kind of how if one sister goes down, the rest will go down with them, and kind of also how easily water can be contaminated, and it just all kind of comes together. But it's really interesting. I love that section. That kind of conversation.
Yeah, I think it's a really nice moment with Grace because she's so often, and also when you get to the end of the novel, she is the oldest sister and therefore the sort of strongest and toughest, and she doesn't. I guess it's sort of her job to take on the role of mother when the mother goes missing, in the novel. So we don't really see that more sensitive side of her. And I think that's a really lovely moment with her and Leah.
And also it's I was going to say it's also around the point where Sky first and then Grace, they cut their long hair that they've been, you know, they've had to keep their hair long and uncut, you know, due to kind of King's demands, and they finally, Grace allows them to cut it, and it's kind of, I don't know, you kind of get a sense, I mean, we can talk about, you know, the ending next, but you kind of get a sense of where it was going early on, and I guess this kind of shows, you know, as you were saying, like Grace is the older sister, and she's kind of like almost like a mother to the other two, and you kind of feel, you know, they're gonna perhaps be more okay with her. I don't know, that she's more sensitive, but then, you know, once the power gets to you, maybe it could change. But
Exactly. And also, I mean, she suffered at the hands of King, and it's alluded that the mother suffered also. So maybe, and then there's that quote that I read out, which was one of the welcome book ones, where it's like, well, why should you have to escape it? You know? And I think that that can be, unfortunately, with certain women that, like, I mean, you see it all the time with not just feminism, but like, I mean, it's a really sort of trivial example, but like, you know, student loans in the US. It's like, well, I had to suffer paying off my huge student loans, and therefore we shouldn't scrap them for other people. Or like, it just doesn't make any sense. It's like, well, if I suffered, then you have to as well. Otherwise, it's not fair. And it's like, well, no, that's not how it works at all. But maybe Grace can be the one to break that cycle. I don't know.
Yeah.
But what, yeah, I mean, talking about water, what I think is interesting at the end of the novel. So if you've not read it yet, spoilers. This whole thing is a spoiler. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Um, they obviously they realize everything's a lie, and interestingly, James is the one that reveals. And we've not talked about James yet. I just realized. Who's Lo's brother, but low key a bit irrelevant. And he comes
He
to
only
Grace
kind
at the
of,
end.
yeah.
Yeah, and he has this big sort of confessional moment where he's like, King is alive, this isn't an island, you know, and he reveals all these things that, you know, the men killed their mother. Which again, I can't believe was the first time we're mentioning it here, but is
And
this
also
big,
that they were sent, the men weren't there by accident, they were sent by
yeah,
King to basically retrieve the girls because King wanted to be with Grace and to leave the mother.
very
So
beautiful.
yeah.
But yeah, so this big revelation comes, and in response, there's violence. Grace slits his throat, and Leah's job is to shoot Lo, her lover. Lo's son has already died at this point by accident
In
by
our
hornets.
minutes, which we were like, we both thought this is
Crazy.
mad. Like,
What are the odds when we started this book club that we were going to read 2 books back to back that included death by hornets? Like, very bizarre.
and also, yeah, and also in a ground nest as well, and running through to escape. You know, like it's
It was
strange.
eerie. It was eerily similar. So yeah, we have this big climactic ending of obviously the reveal that Mother is dead, the reveal that King is alive and that he wants the girls to join him, and the deaths of the men eventually, and the girls sort of making their own way for the first time in their lives. And they head away from the water. They don't get on the boat, which is what they've seen King and Mother do previously when they've left the island.
And they see at the end, they see a boat coming towards the shore, don't they?
Yeah, and they head towards
the other
the
direction.
forest where the barbed wire is, and that's like their escape, you know, their fresh starts, which is interesting that they're sort of veering away from the path that they've seen their parents traverse.
And
Yeah.
crossing the whole ending. Do you want to read out the ending of them crossing the boundary?
Oh yeah.
Very kind of liminal kind of
Yeah,
crossing.
the last paragraph, which is page 247, if you're following along. At the border, the rusted barbs of wire, we weigh it down with branches until we can step over. It takes us some time, but we clear it. We stand for a second on the other side of the territory, breathing in the new air. Somewhere in the distance there are voices, but they seem very far away. We look back towards the house, but it is long gone. All we can see is the forest, the cool leaves, the branches. It is fine. We are fine. We jump onto a felled tree trunk. We wrap our arms around each other. Without noticing it, touch has become easy again. We put our hands everywhere. There is far to go, and so we do not stop for long. We push the branches with our hands, and beyond each branch is another step for us to take. Even as the sound of the birds and the voices grow louder, even as we move further away, even as the leaves cut out the sunlight, and that is its own miracle. The three of us taking step after step. Our own world is somewhere past it. Should we walk far enough? We move into it with no fear. And I guess now would be a good time to go on to our last question, which is, we are unsure of the girl's future when the novel ends. What do you think happens next?
And also, how did everyone, think, how did everyone find the ending?
Yeah, I
Except
think if Sylvie's still here, what did you think of the ending, lovely? What did you think of the ending, babe?
I find it interesting in the bit with what's his name, James. When he's kind of, giving out lots of answers all at once about, oh, this, mother's dead, we killed her, king is alive, like, it's a bit like the last book where there was just one chapter with a massive explanation, and it's all kind of a bit like after kind of the slow pace, and then it's just like, oh, okay. and also I think both me and Anna found the kind of ending quite predictable. Again, a bit like the last book, a bit anticlimactic. And I think we both agreed that we both enjoyed the kind of journey of the book, rather than the kind of the kind of ending kind of slightly ruined it, maybe.
I think when you set up that device of women, men, isolated island, parents out of the picture, these girls are unprotected, one of them has to win. It's either they overpower the girls or the girls overpower them. And because of the genre I didn't think it was going to end with all of the girls dying. Potentially one of them, I thought maybe Lo would lash out at Leah for being a bit too clingy or something. I thought maybe then that would spark other violence. But I do like that they all made it out unscathed. But in a way, like with Promising Young Woman, when you set up that sort of men versus women in this sort of stylized way, is like one of them has to the other. That's the only way this is gonna go. And
I find
yeah,
I've talking about all the girls kind of come out. I mean, I guess it's like a relief to women, but at the same time, I feel like it's too safe an ending in a way.
Which is why I really loved the way that Promising Young Woman ended, which I know was controversial for a lot of women for that reason, that it wasn't cathartic and it wasn't pleasant. But yeah, I do see what you mean, that there is a lack of sort of, the rest of the novel is so raw and so brutal, and it's like, well, why pull the punch right at the end and just have a sort of neat ending? I don't know.
And also, books, need to, our last two, like I said, stop having this kind of chapter where all is revealed by a cat, especially in this one where it's just all kind of dialogue. And it's just it would have been more interesting if they found out a different way.
Or if King came back himself or something, I don't know. Or they found her body, like the mother's body. Ooh, Sylvie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I do kind of agree with that. I feel yeah.
Yeah, I do feel that as well. I mean, I think so much of the media that we get about trauma is about how to get out of the trauma situation, but it doesn't often acknowledge the fact that you're still traumatized once you're out of that abusive situation. So I do really like that point of what you said, Sylvie, where like we don't actually see them fending for themselves. It's this big whole, oh, we're heading off on this big journey, but we don't actually know if this is this big feminist win for them, because they're still carrying a lot of baggage, and we still know that their dad is alive and out there and wants to be with them. And potentially maybe that is the sort of like realistic ending, that, you know, there is still the threat of potential harm on the horizon, especially as they see a boat, you know, as they're leaving.
Well, do you think they're all in their minds when they cross that border, because they're then breathing in the contaminated air and, you know, like all that stuff, you know, that they're kind of taught and stuff? Do you think they're kind of committing a kind of suicide together, and that they think that that's better than
the life
the
that they
alternate
have?
reality? I don't
Potentially.
know. Because
They
there
don't
is that
take
thing of
with
they're
them, do
stepping
they?
out without any fear, you know. It's, yeah, I don't know. It's,
that's a good point, actually. I didn't think of that.
yeah, I just thought of it now. I was just thinking, like, maybe, I don't know.
A little Thelma and Louise reference. Although not as exciting. I mean, yeah, it was, yeah. I love Thelma and Louise so much. Can we do Thelma and Louise at one point? Can we watch that again?
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, I do get the sense that from the beginning, I was like, there's only one way this is going to go. And I felt like I knew which way it was going to go. And there were these things that were presented like twists or certain shocks that I just was not shocked by. Like I was not shocked at the revelation that it's not an island. And I'm like, oh, your abusive and violent parents lied to you about the state of the world. That's not a surprise. Or even the fact that, yeah, the mother was dead. Like I think we all clocked that. Maybe we're just
I felt,
too distrustful of men, but we were like, yeah, no, that's not a surprise.
I was kind of, when James like admitted to it, I was kind of like, oh, like I was, because it was like the first thought that popped into my head when she, you know, went missing, and I was just thinking, you know, when it was kind of written like it was like a revelation, I was kind of like, you know, I was starting to think, actually I must be wrong because it's too obvious. But then it came back and I was like, oh, I don't know. Yeah. Because it would have been interesting if she just kind of left. I don't know. Or maybe, you know, she just couldn't deal with that life anymore. I don't know.
Or maybe
you know,
she
like
knew that he wasn't dead and like went out to find, I don't know. Yeah. Yeah, it definitely wasn't my favorite ending, but yeah, and sort of like, you know, Sylvie was saying that it didn't feel dystopian because there is so little detail about that outside world, and I feel like maybe the ending does lose its impact when you don't actually know what they're going into, so you can't really sort of visualize it. You can't picture what that decision actually means for them because you don't know what's there, you know.
maybe there'll be a sequel.
Maybe. Well, this was her debut novel, and she's just published in like 2020 another sort of feminist dystopian thing, which isn't related to this, but that one sounded less interesting to me. That was the one where it was like a lottery.
I didn't like the sound of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was
like,
no. It
pick
just
it, and it
seemed.
tells you what sort of woman to be or something.
Well, it just seemed more a bit like The Power.
I've not read that.
I haven't read it, but like I mean the concept is. I mean I could be. I mean I can't really remember exactly what the the next Sophie Mackintosh one, but I remember kind of thinking, oh, it's quite like an obvious thing for her to do next. I don't know. Yeah. Is anyone going to read her next book?
I don't know. When I looked at the Goodreads reviews for The Water Cure, a lot of people were just sort of like about the comparison with Atwood, and I do get the frustration at that, but I do also see how it lies in that sort of literary canon.
Also, it's like a marketing thing for them, isn't it? It's like everyone. I mean, especially when I think when did this come out? Because there was a point where you know, like it was super popular. So 2018. So it was probably kind of within that time frame of it being, you know, when the TV show of The Handmaid's Tale came out.
So when Margaret was really Margaret, like we're on a first name basis, when she was releasing The Testaments, which was the sequel.
Yeah, I'm just looking up the next. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that does. Yeah, that was one thing that I found that I really wanted to know more about the women that were coming in from the outside, because we only get those little snippets like throughout.
I think it would have been interesting to just base it, you know, when they were still having the women come in, and maybe, you know, a third of the way in, like they of, you know, how we hear that they're kind of banned from coming after that woman commits suicide by falling off one of the stories of the hotel building. You know, I don't know, it's, you know, it's interesting.
Yeah, I think, you know, it is a short book too, and there was definitely room, if the author wanted, to expand on certain elements of the story, for sure. I do get Sylvie's point though, where, you know, what do we come away with? Like, you know, not that you have to learn something new every time you read a book, but when you're reading this sort of speculative fiction or dystopian feminism or paratopia, whatever people want to call it, you do feel
well,
like,
it's
okay,
trying to make
what is this? What is
isn't
this?
it?
Yeah, what is this critiquing? Is this a call to arms? Is this, you know, helping women feel seen? Like, what is the purpose of this novel? Is it just rehashing trauma, like daily lived trauma, or is it saying something about that trauma? And I'm not quite sure, like Sylvie, you know, raised a minute ago, what the sort of message is supposed to be. But I feel bad saying that, because I'm like, okay, not every book has to have a message, but I feel like when it's so overtly like political,
but it is
maybe it
kind
does.
of trying. It is obviously. I feel like reading it, it feels like it has the intention of making a statement, but the statement it makes feels too kind of not nuanced enough, and kind of potentially just regurgitating kind of the kind of feminism you perhaps read about in like BuzzFeed articles. I don't know if you know what I mean, like that's kind of
BuzzFeed feminism. Yeah.
And it's I feel like they could have done more with kind of you know, kind of talking about the kind of will and, you know, how he's kind of the potential of him turning bad or, you know, whatever. And, you know, maybe it would have been interesting to maybe lean more into that and kind of sing how, you know, men are a product of a patriarchal, you know, sexist men are a product of a patriarchal system, and it's, you know, I don't know, and it, yeah, it just and also like their whole situation isolated away from everyone, their lives and their kind of growth kind of stunted. The fact that they're kind of, you know, made to, you know, still be girls even though they're, you know, women. It's that's all part of a kind of patriarchal system too, but it's kind of seen as, you know, by Mother and King as you know, going against that and wanting to keep the girls safe, but it just leaves them powerless and more vulnerable. And it's, I don't know. I went on a thought and then I don't know where it led me.
There's that quote from The Office where it's like, "Oh, I just open my mouth and hope I find it along
Find
the
it
way."
along the way. It's, yeah, I do feel like it could be more nuanced.
I do feel this too. What Sylvie's pointing out is that certain books, it is down to marketing, like how they think they can sell the book, and maybe
Yeah.
the book's actual core message or plot or whatever doesn't fully line up with what it sort of comped with. Because as much as I did enjoy the writing style, it is pitched a lot as the new Atwood, and having read only one Atwood, but you know, it was recently and it was actually for this book club, was our first book. Margaret Atwood's writing is so much more rich and full of complexity and poignancy in a way that, I don't know, a book this sort of slim or shallow in terms of world building could actually deliver on that promise of being Margaret Atwood, like, you know.
And also it didn't really, although, you know, that obviously there were sections we read out and the sections that were there were like interesting, but I feel like there also just wasn't enough of the kind of relationship between all the girls,
Yeah.
because that's interesting, you know, to kind of see how, I guess, you know, they're kind of saying things that, you know, men do to hurt women can come through women as well. And
Yeah, I think between the two of them, Mother is a much more compelling character than King, but obviously
yeah,
King was
because
led
that's
down.
what I,
Yeah,
because
that's
that kind of came up in my mind because you were talking about, you know, Atwood and stuff, and thinking about Cat's Eye, like the, you know, the kind of perspective was a lot more interesting because, you know, the protagonist was kind of, you know, and she admitted it that, you know, she had kind of, I guess, sexist, you know, kind of thoughts about fellow women and kind of them as kind of competitors, or like, you know, calling other women shallow, or, you know, like, you know, comparing herself to them, and, you know, there being kind of hierarchies and stuff, and I feel like it's, you know, I guess there just wasn't that kind of, I mean, I guess maybe we just didn't spend enough time with just the girls to like see different dimensions of their characters, and how they kind of interacted with each other, and how kind of what they've been taught, you know, affected their relationships with each other, not just with men.
Yeah. Although I think maybe potentially the ending would be a really compelling beginning, you know, these girls breaking out of this sort of cycle of abuse and lies and navigating what the outside world is. Potentially that was a more interesting place to start the book. I mean, you could have flashbacks to like how it was on the island, but I do think, like Sylvie says, that it isn't the big feminist win that potentially it's portrayed as, and actually we don't know enough about the outside world to really have much of a opinion about what that ending is. It loses its impact definitely for not being as sort of vivid as the rest of the book.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, we might have reached the end of our discussion on our July book. Thank you, Sylvie, for reading it. I think potentially Sylvie was the only person who read it, but one is always better than none. So thank you very much, and for joining in the conversation. Really enjoyed reading your thoughts. Very articulate and wonderful and everything like that. So yeah. Absolutely. I think life post cult is a very interesting trope. Because like obviously the what is it? The temptation is obviously there to be like, oh, all these weird rituals, all this weird violence happens in this cult. But actually what's much more compelling is what happens next. Because, you know, all of these stories end somewhere, you know, the cults, you know, they get arrested or someone dies, like something ends tragically, and it's actually, well, how does life go on after that? And that's really compelling, even kind of more so than the like details of all the weird cult things that go on. Yeah. But yeah, with that, shall we look ahead to what the book club is doing next month and the month after that? So obviously July, we read The Water Cure. Our book in August is going to be Pandora's Jar by Natalie Haynes, and we had some copy on hand, which is a non-fiction book on women in the Greek myths. And so we're going to be talking a lot about women's role in the Greek myths, why that they're lesser known or less talked about, all of those wonderful things. So I would obviously love it if anyone wanted to join and read that. And then in September, we're going to be reading Hangs a Man by Shirley Jackson, which if you saw the movie Shirley, which is a sort of loose biopic of Shirley Jackson when she was writing this story about a missing student on her university campus, it's basically that. It's the book that she wrote about this young woman who's gone missing. And we thought that September would be a good time. It's when schools are starting, you know, autumn's coming, chill in the air. So we're getting ready for kind of spooky, cozy season with some Shirley Jackson in September. Obviously with a sort of feminist dark twist. So will be really exciting if you will join us for the next 2 reads.
Yay!
Thank you so much for coming, Sylvie.
Thank you for coming. Yeah.
But yeah, as always, really enjoyed tonight and looking forward to the next one. So yeah. We will obviously announce on the Twitter what's going on with Pandora's Jar and when all those live show dates are going to be, and we'll probably, hopefully, see you then. So goodbye.